Leaders' Questions. Thanks to Cisco Systems and Exertis Ireland, providing a secure, intelligent platform for digital business. Visit intelligentIT.ie.
Leaders' Questions with Stuart Lancaster is brought to you in association with Cisco Systems and Exertis Ireland. Cisco are leaders in securing your business information. Don't believe us? Cisco blocks 19.7 billion threats a day on its own and its customers' networks. When it comes to internet traffic, we pull over a lot of bad drivers. To hear more, visit intelligentIT.ie. And you're very welcome along to another Leaders' Questions, where Stuart Lancaster speaks to some of the brightest minds in business and sport and tries to see what it is that makes them tick as leaders. Stuart, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Joe.
So this week we're talking to Bill Beswick. Before we introduce Bill, why is Bill somebody that's important, and what do you think about his leadership development skills that is something that you've kind of benefited from?
Well, I would say Bill has probably singly the biggest influence on my career. So that's why, I think it's interesting for everyone to have a listen to what Bill's got to say. We met, I was invited to go as a academy coach to a leadership conference in France. And Bill was the presenter at the conference. And he came across really well, and we ended up connecting at the end of the event. I think he saw something in me as well. I'd just taken over as head coach of Leeds Tykes at the time. They'd just been relegated from the Premiership, and we had to build a team to get promoted back into the Premiership. And he sort of helped me through that year. We then got promoted in the Premiership, and then we started going from winning lots of games to losing lots of games. So I needed his help even more. And then we stayed in contact, and obviously during that development time, but also into the England Saxons job and international coaching versus club coaching, then the interim job with England, and then the England job. So he was there throughout, really, and we established a really strong relationship. Very, very supportive of me, challenged me in the right way, and having worked in many other sports and with many other head coaches, is invaluable learning for me about how to be better.
You had to be very open-minded to go looking for help at that point, instead of being, well, I know everything, I've just got this job and I'm quite a young man, so why do I need to get help?
I was a long way from thinking I knew everything. And I think sometimes, when you're on a coaching pathway or a leadership pathway, sometimes mentors just appear at the right place at the right time, and that's the way it was. I wasn't searching at the time, but it certainly worked out that way. And it has been a huge benefit to me throughout my career. Bill,
good afternoon to you. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, Joe. Good afternoon, Stuart.
Hi, Bill.
Thanks very much for doing this for us. A couple of things strike me. We'll get into your relationship with Stuart in a little while, but you've got like decades now of being involved in sports psychology and helping leaders evolve. It wasn't always a very easy field to get into. So it's interesting that somebody like Stuart is kind of an open door that you're able to push with ideas at the time when he's there. Was that always the case? Do you remember a time when actually, you were on the fringes of sports organisations and maybe people were a little bit suspicious of some of the ideas that you had?
Oh, it was very much so. My start was as a coach. I was a basketball coach and coached the national team for 5 years. And it was as a coach I became more and more fascinated by attitude and character. The talent thing I understood from the start, but it was the character and attitude of the players that fascinated me. And I made the switch to sports psychology. But at that time, the macho culture in sport was such that players thought it was a sign of weakness to share their feelings. Now, fortunately, modern education's changed, and the generation coming through, the millennials and the Z generation, are much more open. And the big help to me was the foreign players. Because when foreign players came into football, which is where I spent most of my time, they were very familiar with mentoring and counselling and sought help straight away. And the English players saw them and responded accordingly. But Stuart's great strength was humility. And that's what attracted me to Stuart. He's a typical Cumbrian. And he never knows it all. And that's his greatest strength, in my opinion.
Can you maybe then come back to circle back around to that? When you are meeting people who are curious and interested in what you're doing and believe that you can have an influence on them, I presume that's the best type of people to work with. But what are the kind of key things how do you begin to get your messages across to people? What do you focus on at the start?
Well, mostly questions rather than direction. I see myself as a thinking partner more than a teacher. The people I'm dealing with have to develop their own style, their own knowledge base, their own credibility. And I'm a guide on that pathway. So although I can give examples from a variety of sports and a variety of head coaches, I largely base my counseling work, on my mentoring work, on being a thinking partner and asking good questions and allowing the knowledge and information to emerge from the young coach.
What's that process like for you?
Challenging. We used to meet at YMCA in Manchester, and Bill had a little room that we'd go into. It was actually a little chapel, was it, Bill? I mean, I don't know how you describe it, but it was a chapel. It felt like I was going to meet like a higher purpose, a higher God. And Bill would sit there and... he did ask lots of questions, but equally he gave me lots of information as well. There's no doubt in my mind that he would stimulate me, and I'd come away. I often judge by, I go on lots of courses and meet lots of people, and I make lots of notes about what I've taken from them. When I'd leave Bill's office or chapel, I'd leave with 5 or 6 pages of things to think about. So he definitely shaped my philosophy in terms of. Probably confirmed a lot of things I'd thought, but yeah, he would ask me questions.
What's he asking you?
How did you win? What would you do differently? What's the reason? One of the big things he always says is, "What's the reason why you're gonna win this game?" Or so how are you going to articulate that to your players? Actually, interestingly, I've been coaching today, and we've got a game this weekend, and I actually asked the players that very question. I said, "Right, we're playing against." This team from Wales, what's their reason why they want to beat Leinster in this particular game? Give me 3 things. So they went 1, 2, 3 straight away. Okay, so what's our reason why we want to? Because obviously we've been successful. We're there to be shot at now, and if we don't meet them emotionally at the same level, such as the quality in the league now, then we won't win the game. And Bill will be a big one on that, on making sure the reason why we want to play this game and the intrinsic motivation is as high as it can be with the team that you've got. That was a big thing we talked about a lot.
Yeah. So these are questions. You're saying he's also giving you some information. What type of information are you getting at that kind of early enough stage in your career?
Things that he'd learned, in terms of his own philosophy, and things that he would have tried, and I was so curious to know about. So how did Alex Ferguson? Because obviously Bill worked in Manchester United. How did Alex Ferguson do things? What was different to Alex Ferguson and Steve McLaren? What's it like working with the Roy Keanes, the best of the best? How do you get the best out of them? So how do you motivate the superstar, etc., etc. So many different things that we talked about.
These are good questions. We might just ask Bill. Can you maybe spool us back a little bit before we get to the kind of nuts and bolts of what happens at Manchester United? But so again, I'm not sure that the whole world would have had Alex Ferguson pinned as somebody who would have embraced the culture of somebody coming in to speak to his players about performance. There was a general sense of him being somebody who wanted to set the tone and the agenda and make sure that everybody kind of followed to that. But clearly he was open to ideas from outside, and you can see from his coaching, the way he hired coaches all the way to Carlos Queiroz and to the very end, that he did want players who came from outside, and he wanted coaches who came from outside to give him ideas of what else was going on in the world. So what was your role in all that?
Well, it was Steve McLaren that went to Manchester United as assistant manager that took me along. So Alex accepted me because Steve recommended me. And Alex's greatest strength was his control of the situation. He had 33 international players, all with varying ego strengths, but he controlled it absolutely. And I realized that when I asked him, could I speak to the first team, explain my role, explain the kind of things they might want to see me about, which is a very important start for a sports psychologist in a club. And I could see he was very hesitant about that because he has such a control to let somebody else talk to his team. It was very difficult for him. But I got smart. I was quite experienced by that stage. He agreed to let me speak to the team. On the morning I was speaking to the team, I went in at 7 o'clock, knowing that he'd be the only person in the training ground. So he'd finished his training. He was making tea and toast. I made a cup of tea with him, and I said, "Can you spare 10 minutes?" And he said, "Yeah, come in, Bill." And I gave him my talk for the first team. I said, "Could you check that for me? Because I'd like to know that you're comfortable with it." So he sat at his desk and read the talk I was going to give to the team. And he started ticking things off, underlining things, highlighting things. And he said, "I really like this. I really like this. Can you make a big point of that? What else can you say about that?" So by the time that 10, 20 minutes had elapsed, he owned the speech. So when he introduced me to the players, it wasn't with hesitation. It was like, "Listen to this, boys. This is good stuff. You need to hear this." And I think that got me off on a really good footing with Alex, in the sense that he learned to trust me. My instincts were good with the team. I wasn't going to argue points that he would differ from.
That definitely helps. I know too that I was just researching this, and Roy Keane name checks you when he's the manager of Sunderland. He says that you're somebody that he has spoken to at that point as well. What was your relationship like with Keane?
Well, Roy is tough. Any relationship with Roy is tough because he's the most honest athlete I've ever worked with. But he is a really, really nice man. I really liked him. And we learned to trust each other, and we learned to share with each other. And he was consumed with getting better. He didn't want small talk. He didn't want praise. He wanted me to look at his game, look at his performance, and say, "You might consider this to try and find an extra 1%. Perhaps think about this." I also think he needed somebody neutral. I'm very neutral. I'm not emotionally involved with the teams I'm with, although I do support them, of course. But I am somebody that they learn to trust. Everything with me is confidential. And I think Roy wanted a neutral figure, a slightly older figure at that time, to share his ideas and share his anxieties with. And it was a very good relation. I learned as much from Roy as he learned from me, but trust me.
Because I was reading some of the stuff that you've said, and, you know, just talking about every day it's a choice, physical, technical, tactical, but the mind is the means. And that definitely put me, you know, like the whole notion of Roy Keane at training is fairly famous. Did you have any experience of the Keane persona on the training field?
Well, a story I can share with you, and I think my friend Steve McLaren wouldn't mind. I've heard him talk about this publicly. But he came from Derby County to Manchester United in the space of 3 days. His life was turned upside down. He was the assistant manager of Manchester United. So for his first day's training, he decided that he would take a fun approach and get to know them and make it a little bit more social. So he did team relays and team competitions to try and bed himself in. And partway through this, Roy, who'd lost a competition and was made to do press-ups, walked off the field. He did say something, but I'm not going to repeat it, yeah. He walked off the field and went home. And when I got back from Derby County that evening, Steve was on the phone to me and explained to me he was really devastated. His captain had walked off the field in the first day of training. And I said, "You've got to ring Roy." And that was like asking somebody to catch a hand grenade. I said, "You've got to ring Roy." One principle of coaching is never let today's problem roll into tomorrow. It gets worse. Deal with it now. He rang Roy, and 2 hours later he rang me and said, "I've just had a masterclass in coaching. The only thing that Roy is interested in is hard work and challenge, because that's what prepares him to go out in front of 75,000 people and television cameras on a Saturday. If he's not worked hard during the week, he doesn't feel ready for the performance on a Saturday. And I'd taken one of those training sessions that he needs so badly and abused it by doing things that weren't relevant to the game. That was Roy. He was very honest, very tough-minded, but actually very intelligent and perceptive about what top players needed.
Is this where Tuesday comes from?
Who do you think he reminds you of? Which rugby player do you think I'm coaching at the moment? I mean, what Bill's describing there is Johnny. You know, is Johnny Sexton. I mean, that's exactly what Johnny's like, and that's why he, like Roy, is, you know, right up there with the best of the best, because he wants that challenge the whole time. He wants to get better. He's driven to get better. He drives it in other people. And as a coach, you have to be on point. You know, you can't waste a minute. You can't waste a training session. You've got to know what you're doing, and you've got to make sure you deliver it in a effective way that gets the best out of him and the others. And yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, my roles have varied through my career. You know, with the academy role at Leeds, I was a hands-on coach from 30 to 35, and I was growing all the time as a coach because I was coaching day in, day out. Then I was the Leeds Tykes coach, and again, I was coaching, you know, head coaching. But then I got dragged more and more into the bigger picture stuff with the Leeds job, and delegated some of the coaching to my assistants. England then comes around, and I'm coaching England Saxons, albeit it's limited because there's the Churchill Cup and like 6 or 7 games a year. But I'm seeing other organisations, but I'm actually doing as much hands-on coaching. And then the England job, I think we've discussed in the past, you know, it's the title was head coach, but I gravitated again away from coaching. There's so many other things that needed dealing with, you know, the bigger picture stuff on leadership and management, which I knew I could do. But the beauty of the Leinster job really for me is that I'm coaching again. So I'm the Steve McLaren, if you like, who's doing the Tuesdays, and so I spend my time now thinking all about how can I challenge these players, make these players better, create instincts in them that become hardwired so that when they play in the big games in Europe and in the Pro 14, we can deliver under pressure. That's
a very interesting development, because you want to challenge them every day, but you still want to inculcate habits. And it's that, like, when, you know, when the Karate Kid wax on, wax off, he gets bored, but at the end of it, he can do the things that the teacher wants him to do. How do you keep the training sessions so interesting that they're not bored, or do you care about that? Like, is there today might be a little bit boring, lads, but at the end of it, everybody's going to understand where the body position needs to be at the ruck, or whatever it is that you're specifically working on. Yeah, no, I wouldn't say they would ever be boring. They should never be boring. They should always be competitive. There should always be challenge in there. What you do is you flex between how hard the challenge is. So if your team is slightly low on confidence, and you know, you might make it subtly more easier for the attack to achieve success over the defence by the way in which you create speed of ball, or the numbers that you put in the defensive line, or whatever. Or sometimes you might recognise that you've got a big game coming and you want them to feel failure and have that sense of anxiety going into a big game, so that, Christ, we need to be on point here, because, you know, it's happening at the moment. You know, we've got 2 teams training flat out, and because of the way the system works in Ireland, some of the more senior Ireland players are actually in the non-starting 15. So effectively, the lads who are playing are getting prepped with, like, they're playing against, you know, Johnny Sexton, Robbie Henshaw, Gary Ringrose, and it's brilliant. But sometimes I have to pare them back a bit so the team that's going out is confident. Win,
yeah, exactly. So it's just, and that's the subtlety of coaching, I think, that people often miss. You know, it's intensity, it's duration, so you can challenge them through skill set, through mindset. And the best coaches I've worked with, they just seem to pick the right tools out of the box at the right time on any given session. And it should never be boring.
The other thing that I wanted to ask you about was complacency, or coming up against an opponent who you're very confident the team knows they can win. So we're recording this just after the All-Ireland football final, where the Dublin team knew that they were far superior if they showed up to their opponents. And there were a couple of times last year where you were playing teams in big games who you'd just recently beaten in a big game where everything was on the line, and you knew that if your team performed at that level. How do you change the messaging? Do you change the messaging? Do you have to be aware of that? Because all their mates are telling them, and all their WhatsApp groups are buzzing with, "Ooh, this is going to be easy this weekend." Like, somehow you've got to counteract that. Yeah. I mean, Bill taught me this, actually. There's a sort of spectrum of, you know, anxiety and fear and complacency and confidence, you know, and where you sit on this
this spectrum. You want your team to be confident, but you want that element of anxiety leading into a big game so that you're not complacent. But you don't want it to be so overwhelming that they're fearful of making a mistake and they can't deliver. So it goes back to the mindset, really. So you obviously, if you're prepping to play against a team that you perceive stronger than, then clearly you don't show all their weaknesses. You just show their strengths and talk about the reason this team can hurt us is because of X, Y, and Z. Let's have a look at this, and you show them evidence. You challenge them in training, our own team in training, so that perhaps they don't achieve that much success. So they're thinking, we're not quite ready here. We need to be extra prepared. So all little tools like that, and then we make sure that the motivation for winning the game. So what's the motivation to win after winning? The Dublin team, as you've just described, they've done it 4 times on the bounce. We had success last year with the European Cup and the Pro 14 title. Can we win after winning? Well, I cited the Crusaders this year, who won Super Rugby last year, Super Rugby this year. That's what champion teams do. So, and the art of coaching is to give that motivation. So I would use, I've talked about the Patriots, winning the Super Bowl 5 times. Well, Leinster won the European Cup 4 times. Why can't we be the first team to win the European Cup 5 times? That's got to be a goal and a driver for us.
Yeah.
But, it's a different psychology this year because, last year we'd lost in 2 semi-finals. And, that hurt. And the reason why we wanted to win was huge inside us for the whole of the season. And the art of what Leo and I need to do this year is to make sure we're that competitive. And internal competition drives that as well, for selection and the way in which you create the challenge in training. So you talk about Tuesdays, you want it tough and competitive so that actually the game feels, by comparison, I'm ready for this because I've done it week in, week out during Tuesday.
Yeah. Bill, what would your advice be to somebody in Stuart's situation this time, where the team is the best team in Europe and has clearly swept all before them?
Was the best team in Europe
last season. How do you prepare that mindset? What are the tricks that you've learned over the years?
Stuart's just said a great point. The great coach moves the great teams on from every game. They take the win, they did take the learning out of it, and then they start with a blank piece of paper. If they look as though they're too confident, we inject anxiety. If they look anxious, we inject confidence. All during the week, that mindset's regulated. And Stuart talked before, early in the show, about the reason why. You need to program the software as well as program the hardware. On the training field and in the gym, we're programming the hardware. But you need to program the software as well. And they need to see each game as discrete. So you made a good point before, Ger. The conversations around winners change. When you're not winning, the conversations are different. When you begin to be a winner, the conversations around the players at home, social media change. And they lull the player into thinking that winning is now automatic. It's the coach's job to offset that, to change those conversations internally. And again, Stuart's just given you one of the key ways you change the mindset of a team. Introduce 5 new players. All of a sudden, you've shaken up the balance of things. Players left out the team and now questioning why. They've got greater anxiety of what am I not doing. You keep the team on edge, but never roll on from the game before as though it's a continuum. Every game is discrete. Every game is its own challenge. Every game needs preparation in exactly the same way as the one before.
In your experience, how much of this was instinctive in the truly great managers of the past, and how much of it was actually something that they learned and adopted over the period of time that they would have been in their peak?
Well, the instinctive part was wanting to win every game. Every game. Every game is important to the great coaches, the great managers. The learning part was the strategies about closing down the game the previous week, taking the learning out, integrating that, and then moving on and creating a new collective mindset in the team during the week. building that mindset up. So Saturday became a very important game, not just another game in the season, but a very important game. And being courageous enough to recognize the team is not in a good place mentally and make some tough changes. Like I said, introduce 5 new players in the team. Take your 5 seniors and leave them on the bench for the 60th minute onwards. Coaching is about being brave, but it's about recognizing I'm not comfortable where the team is and need to do something before the game escapes me.
Leaders' Questions with Stuart Lancaster is brought to you in association with Cisco Systems and Exertis Ireland. Cisco are leaders in securing your business information. Don't believe us? We analyse 6 billion emails a day. You think your inbox is full. To hear more, visit intelligentIT.ie. Obviously, this isn't something that you kind of impact on a date. You don't decide this is what we're going to do. Culture takes a long time to seep into an organisation. When you look back at your time at England and you look back at your time and at the various stages of Leeds, like, how quickly did it take you to get to a point where you were happy with the culture?
I think it depends on the context. So if I was to describe, how would I build a team, culture would be very much at the base of the pyramid, the most important building block, the foundation. Then, identity, what do we stand for, who we're playing for, what's the shirt mean to us. The higher purpose is the next stage, and so it goes up to ultimately the players driving the whole thing. So a lot for the teams I've worked in depended on the evolution and the maturity of the team. So when I was at Leeds, the team had been relegated, all the players had gone, there was only 7 players left, so we had to start from scratch. But because it was my team, because I'd played there as a player and it meant so much to me, I guess my passion for the team and the organisation and the county and the people rippled through the players, and the reason why we all wanted to play for Leeds was driven through the pre-season. Interestingly, a great learning experience for me in my first game of the season. I did so much on the software, as Bill has described. We actually came to the first game of the season against London Welsh at home, and we lost. And I remember one of the captain, the most experienced player in the team, turned around to me and said, I felt exhausted. And I realised I'd taken them too far emotionally. They wanted to win too much, and they were emotionally spent before the game had even started, because such was their desire to want to win. And
how do you calm that down, though? Because
it was my fault, really, because I kept talking about it, and I made it bigger and bigger. So it's that old, the optimum arousal and on the inverted U. You want to hit them, don't take them too far where they start to drop their performance. You want to hit that sweet spot. And I'd take them over the edge, and that was a great learning experience in that first game for me, first senior game of coaching.
So what do you do now that you didn't do?
I just recognise through experience, I recognise the psychology of the group earlier and better, and then have more tools available to either bring it up or pare it down. I think that's what experience has taught me. And Bill made an interesting point there about the great coaches wanted to win. One thing you learn as an international coach, it's all about winning. So it sharpens your mind so now I'm at Leinster, and you could argue that we don't need to win every game, but I know the pain of losing, and I know the pain of losing on the highest and the biggest stage, and it's not a pain I ever want repeated. So I actually think I'm a better coach now because I went through those tough times, because I'm more ruthless in my mindset, I'm more driven, because of the enjoyment of success, but equally the pain of losing, is so deep. But you can't get the success without the foundation. And coming into Leinster, culture very strong identity. Within England, culture, we were on the back of the 2000 World Cup. There were a lot of things need fixing, and I changed a lot of the players, dropped a lot of senior players, brought a lot of younger players in, talked about the reason why playing for England, talked about the identity about being English, and gradually, we changed things. And people say it takes, weeks or years or months to years to change a culture. I actually don't think it does. I think we almost did it in a week. It's then keeping that culture alive that takes the time.
Nursing it and making sure that it isn't being poisoned or...
Yeah, exactly. So you're being absolutely ruthless in your identification of anyone that might take energy away from that team or that culture that you've created. Whether it's, and obviously that's based on trust, on, ownership, all those little things that make up a strong team. Someone said to me the other day, how could you define a good culture? And I think 3 things really. 1, good people want to join your organisation. 2, good people who are in your organisation stay longer than expected. And 3, when they leave the organisation, which some people will, they say that was the best time of my career. That's, for me, a good definition of what a good culture is. If people are leaving your organisation and not wanting to come in, then
something's wrong. Problem. Yeah, for sure. Bill, your background was basketball. You won, I think, a Commonwealth gold with a basketball team. How transferable were the skill sets from sport to sport? Does it actually matter which sport you're talking to people about? Does it turn out at the end of the day everybody is just human and we've got exactly the same anxieties, irrespective of whether or not you're a basketballer standing over a shot or if you're David Beckham over a free kick?
Correct. I think what transfers mostly is the people skills. To get the best out of a basketball team is not much different from getting the best out of a rugby team, a football team. Sport's a question of balance between human doings and human beings. And initially when I started coaching, and my generation was 90% human doings, telling them what to do, command and control, and very little about human doings. They just did what we told them to do. Now, I think it's almost reversed. Now sport is about connecting with human beings and making them want to play for you and want to give the commitment and the effort. And I think that coaching in basketball was very much, for me, 66 games all around the world, was very much getting the best out of a bunch of young men who were perhaps inferior in talent terms to many of the teams we played and still getting some decent results. And that taught me a great deal because our talent base was low because we were small England and we were playing world level teams. But our attitude level, our effort level, our commitment level was fantastic. And that was a major lesson that's transferred across to every team I've worked with.
In terms of the culture conversation that we've been having there, from your perspective, has it been easy enough for you to identify weak cultures or where there have been issues when you've been asked to go in? Is it a fairly obvious thing to anybody who's there?
I have a friend, a very good friend called Steve Harrison, who was a top football coach. We worked together for a number of years. And we used to call him the sniffer because he used to say he could go into any sports club and sniff, and he'd know within an hour what the culture of that club was. And he used to define it as he'd watch people if they had a sense of purpose, if they were moving quickly because they were engaged, if they were bright-eyed, if there was a lot of communication going on and humor, if people walking past nodded to him and acknowledged him, they were comfortable in their own skins. You could begin to list a number of points that says, this is an organization where people matter. This is an organization where players have a sense of purpose, where coaches are comfortable with the players, where everybody's engaged in some purpose, worthwhile activity. But there's time for human connections to exist and develop. And I think the sniffer had it right. I think if you go into Leinster, on any day you chose, you'd see all those positives and you'd sniff and say, this is a good club to be in.
Yeah.
I think you would. I think if you came in and all those things Bill's just described, you'd see those. You'd see those on a daily basis. Joe Schmidt actually, interestingly, brought in I think when he came from France, a handshake meeting. Greet, everyone shakes the hand, and it's still there now. So when I've had guests come in who've come from the UK who said, listen, we're interested to see Leinster, and Leah's very welcoming and certainly very much an open door policy. And when they all leave, they'll go, geez, that was a really, really positive environment to come in. Now, it doesn't guarantee winning, but it goes a long way towards helping you win, that's for sure.
Yeah, I know you're saying that because you've come from international coaching, you realise that winning is absolutely everything. It is sport, though. Defeat will happen. Like, we talk to jockeys and they're like, if I've got a 10% streak of winning, I'm doing really well. And so they have to get used to losing all the time. Do you get better at losing or worse as this all goes on?
Worse. Worse. I think... It's never easy. It's never easy losing. Why my mindset probably shaped a lot by what Bill and I would talk about is I'd have to go from what's the problem to what's the solution as quickly as possible, because it's my job to reshape the mindset after losing. And so as a coach, if you're dragging it around 24, 48 hours after the game, then you've got no chance of helping your team win the next game. So you become very resilient at dealing with it and trying to get from the problem, why did we lose, to what's the solution. Here are 3 things. I think if we do this, we can win next week. But that takes a lot of mental stress yourself as a coach, because often, particularly as a rugby coach, American football coach, maybe you've got some influence or more influence on the outcome because you're calling the plays. A lot of the time, you've got zero influence or limited influence, maybe a few substitutions you can make here and there, and maybe 5 minutes at half time. But that's what we sign up to. And you get used to the feeling of, I don't have full control here, but the pain of losing never goes away and actually drives you to be a better coach. Yeah.
Is that where your comfortable in chaos comes from? Is that you have to be comfortable with the chaos of the play that's out there, and if they have a little sense of, well, okay, at least they can actually influence it?
Yeah, I do think there's something about, I'm not saying my demeanour's right, lots of coaches do different things, but I often think that if a coach is in the box showing ill discipline, showing lack of emotional control, I think it often reflects in the team. You look at the Dublin football team, Jim Gavin, he doesn't give much away, does he?
No.
He's completely calm and in control of his emotions. He knows exactly what's going on, and even through the stressful moments, he looks calm and composed. And I think that's the way his team plays. And I think that's something I think is really important, because I think often teams take on the personality of the coach. I could think of if you took Australia, New Zealand rugby union teams, you look at the New Zealand coaching blocks and the Australian coaching box. The difference in the 2 coaches, in Steve Hansen and Michael Checker, but also how sometimes that can mirror in the team as well.
Yeah.
I think passion's important, but it's making sure it's channeled in the right way as a coach. So you've got discipline, passion.
Yeah. Bill, the whole notion of that, you think about Alex Ferguson on the sideline, but you kind of think of Ferguson as he was a gambler in real life, and his teams took gambles late in matches. There's kind of been a caricature of Ferguson as somebody who was just ranting and raving the whole time, but clearly he was unbelievably calculating throughout that whole period. So I can see how people will be going, hang on a second now, Ferguson was kind of prone to those bouts of rage, but his team were also prone to bouts of rage, and it didn't do them that much harm.
I think that's a media image. I never saw that. He was tough. By God, he was tough. But he gave his team 2 great qualities. He gave them belief and trust. When they went on the field, they had his belief that they were the best team. And they had his trust because he sat back and let them play. He didn't try to manage the game. He might manage some substitutions. He had let his team take responsibility for the outcome of the game. And they thrived on it. They loved it. They learned to do what they needed to do. A great coach in America, Phil Jackson, coached the Los Angeles Lakers basketball team. And he decided that his team couldn't solve problems on the court the way they should do. So he stopped all communication to them. He didn't call any timeouts. He didn't do any pre-game talks. He just left them. And slowly, instead of looking at him, they began to sort their own problems out. Ferguson was very much like that. He wanted them to take responsibility on the field. He was very smart in terms of, and ahead of his time in terms of giving players that great sense that they could take a risk, make a mistake, and there was no punishment. In fact, he would applaud them. He wanted his teams to play bravely. He was a brave man. He wanted his teams to play bravely. And if you played bravely and lost, he was with you 100%. That was his strength. He took defeats much better than people think he did.
One last question on that raises an interesting point. Certain players at different stages and scales of being ready to step up and be the leader. how do you judge what stage somebody's at? Somebody can be a born leader at 21 and they arrive in the team and they're ready to go and they want to go up and take the toss and push the captain out of the way and make decisions. Others are very talented but just need a little bit more of the guidance and structure in their lives. Is that just about having conversation with them and watching how they respond to things, or do you have to give everybody kind of the same opportunities and the same identical access to, these are the leadership qualities we expect of you and you need to go and do a little bit of extra work on this?
Yeah, I think there's more to it than expecting, really. And the other point I'd make is just on what you said there. There are very, very few 21-year-olds who I've seen come through in the way you've just described. You know, the development of leadership, I think, is absolutely fundamental in the winning of in teams that win. The best teams have, as Bill described, that Manchester United team, great leaders throughout the team, as well as a great manager, obviously. If I look at the Leinster team that won the European Cup, we had, obviously a great captain in Easton Asiwa, but you had great leaders throughout the team who could manage those tough moments in that final against Racing, and come out on the other side without losing composure, without losing confidence, without losing belief, and deliver. I mean, ultimately, we kicked the final penalty to win the game on 78 minutes, 26 seconds. So, but it doesn't happen by accident. And I think, leadership, generally, your leadership will develop through experience. But as a coach of a team, you can't wait until a 21-year-old becomes 28, 29, 30 in order to become a better leader. So you need to accelerate their development by artificially giving them some leadership opportunities, by giving them some leadership development, by giving them ideas about how they can become a better leader. And for me, we've got great leaders in Leinster, emerging leadership groups such as James Ryan or Gary Ringrose, Luke McGrath.
Are they conversations, or are they like, here's a scenario?
Yeah, it's more, I think lots of coaches are different. I would spend as much time on developing the young leaders in the team as well as coaching the team. So an example would be I would raise their self-awareness of their own personality. So, a simple psychometric, a little questionnaire, fill in, work out what type of personality they are, get them to think about themselves as an individual. What are they introverted? Are they extroverted? Are they a good communicator? Are they directive? Are they a team player? Are they detail orientated? Are they the guy who likes singing, on the back of the bus? So we're all a mixture of these personalities, and it's raising the awareness of their own personality and saying, okay, well, these are your strengths, but here's some areas you need to work on. And sometimes you'd get 360-degree feedback, or I would send them leadership thoughts to read. I'd give them movies to watch. There's the brilliant one I just watched, actually. I need to tell Bill that is on the leadership in the 12 AFL teams in Aussie Rules. It's on Vimeo. I'm going to have to remember the name now because obviously everyone's going to be asking. It's a brilliant example of player development and players driving the leadership in teams. So I would send them that to watch. I would find examples of leadership that have taken place in other sports and relay that to the emerging leadership group to try and keep developing them.
So it's a constant evolving conversation.
All the time.
They're aware of it as a thing that actually, as opposed to, so it's not this kind of, you're not sneaking it into them, I'm kind of backdooring here grandfathering in some information that's going to make you a better leader. It's like, we want to turn you into a better leader. This is an important part of your development as a person we can trust. Yeah, 100%. And so I think that it's critical. It's critical because, we have, Caelan Doris would be a good example. So he's Ireland under-20s captain. So he plays his first senior game for Leinster and he's been the captain. But the temptation is for Caelan Doris is to walk across the white line and just be, I'm on the field, I don't want to upset anyone, I don't want to say too much. That's entirely opposite of what we want from Caelan Doris. What we want Caelan Doris is to be the captain who's captain of Ireland 20s, talking, communicating, leading, making decisions, influencing players around him, getting the best out of people, motivating, inspiring. And I found this a lot in Ireland, actually, since I've been over here. There's a very respectful hierarchy that can emerge. And what I've tried to do, and he's probably played me not the biggest compliment, but once something said to me, he says, you've given the young players a voice and say they now feel confident to speak in meetings, but they have to, because a team of rugby players, you don't win by just having great leaders. All 15 players have to lead in their own way.
And if you've got a guy who's just delivering maybe just the technical side of the game, I don't think that's going to win. It'll win you lots of games, but it won't win you the European Cup or the Pro 14. And the Caelan Doris example is a good one.
Yeah. Bill, it sounds like you've taught Stuart pretty well.
Well, I watch Leinster all the time because I'm Stuart's biggest fan. And what occurs to me about Leinster is they've got the ultimate leadership. They've got pop-up leadership. No matter what the situation is and where the situation is on the field, whoever's in that position to deal with it, deals with it, takes responsibility, shows character. And for me, that's the ultimate leadership. That given any situation that occurred on the field, whoever from our team is there will deal with it, will step up and deal with it. So that's why young players need a voice, because it might be two young players dealing with a situation which is the defining moment of the game. They need to step up and deal with it.
Good stuff. Bill, it's been great having you with us on. Thanks a million for making the time for us. We really appreciate it.
Nice to see you again.
Okay, so by the miracle of our editing software, we're now able to tell you exactly what the name of that Australian documentary is.
There's two. It's called The Chosen Few.
Okay.
And there's one called The Chosen Few 2. The Chosen Few is by a guy called Peter Dixon, Dicson, and it's on Vimeo. And he did a documentary on the head coaches of all the AFL teams in 2015. And then he followed it up with The Chosen Few 2, which is all the captains of the team. And they're both an hour and a half long each. And they are the best documentaries I've seen. I can't believe I've missed them. They're on YouTube anyway, so you might have to search around to find them. But
why? What's so good about them?
Because he really gets into the detail of what it feels like to be a head coach. And he gets into the detail about what it feels to be in that lonely leadership position. So from a coaching perspective, it's I would love to have something done in rugby in the same way, to actually really get people to understand. And the captain's one is not even better, but it's as good for me because it allowed me to pass on to our players. These are guys who are the equivalent to you, operating in a huge sport in Australia, and the pressures and responsibility of being a leader within a team.
Would most coaches feel happy about the fact that this stuff gets revealed, or is there still a sense of fear about allowing yourself to be seen to be somebody? So I don't know if you watch Hard Knocks, so at the HBO series, and I listen to a podcast that does a breakdown of it every week, and the guy who does the breakdown has worked for all of the greatest owners and coaches of all time. He was part of Belichick's team at Cleveland. His name's Michael Lombardi, and he's actually just written a book which I think you might be interested in, called Gridiron Genius, where he talks about working under all those great coaches. But he has been absolutely savaging the coach of the Cleveland Browns for saying the culture's all wrong. It's too many people who are actually in charge, and there's like 5 or 10 different people coming up with the messaging, and the messaging is all wrong in the first place as well. And so the difficulty and the danger is...
Yeah, I think this is slightly different from Hard Knocks. So Hard Knocks basically invites a camera team into your whole of your pre-season. This is a one-to-one interview with a coach and all the coaches. And you're right, I mean, I get the sense, and I know a couple of the AFL coaches, you didn't get much out of one of them in particular, and that's probably his choice, but other coaches gave a real insight. You're right about the Hard Knocks thing, though, because I found myself watching that sometimes wincing a little bit. And, I got asked before the World Cup, can we do a fly-on-the-wall documentary? And not that I was fearful of, stuff coming out, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that you don't want out there for IP.
Nobody looks good 24 hours a day.
Intellectual property, but no, you don't want to give all your secrets away. Number one, and number two, the last thing I needed at the time was a distraction of a camera crew following me around and listening to every move that I made. But I would welcome the opportunity to talk about leadership and coaching within the context of sport, because I think it helps other people, and that's what, if you are a coach, you should be motivated to help other people get better and build good teams. So if you can, and this is, to us, this is the idea behind this, isn't it?
Yeah.
The whole thing is just about, okay, let's speak to some people who are in leadership positions, who work in business and sport, and if someone takes away one nugget from Bill Beswick or Sophie Goldschmidt or whoever it is, then it's got to be worthwhile.
Yeah, and the thing is, once you lift the rock, you see that there are so many different things underneath it that you can actually get into if you want to learn about The Chosen Few as a documentary. But there's loads of other stuff as well.
Yeah.
We might tweet out a reading list of recommended homework.
Yeah, well, we actually went on a leadership development with Leinster not so long ago, and the guy presenting, I'll leave his name out of it, he actually said, no, here's my reading list for the year, the best 5 books I've read, and it was like, whew, I love that, thank you, Eric. Tick, 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 get those ordered.
Yeah.
So yeah, people just need that sometimes, don't they? They need, to be pointed in the direction of where the good leadership books are, because there's so many out there, and you can drive yourself mad by going through every one, trying to find those nuggets, where actually some of them possess a load of nuggets, and we should all gravitate to those.
Yeah, for sure. Stuart, great stuff. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
This podcast series is brought to you in association with Cisco Systems and Exertis Ireland. Cisco are leaders in securing your business information. Don't believe us? We detect 1.5 million new pieces of malware daily. Cisco, security above everything. To hear more, visit intelligentIT.ie.
Leaders' questions. Thanks to Cisco Systems and Exertis Ireland, providing a secure, intelligent platform for digital business. Visit intelligentIT.ie.